Hello, guys, and welcome back to our Draft Day 101 podcast on positional players. We do evaluations and break down positional players a lot deeper and at certain positions. And today we are doing the infamous, the deepest, and probably the headline kind of this class is the wide receivers. And Draft Day, this wide receiver class is pretty deep, I would have to say.
Yeah, this is probably the deepest I've done because I went back to 2004, looking back in that class, and even then I didn't feel like there was wide receivers in the second, third, and fourth rounds that probably could be starters in the NFL. This class, it's the best I've seen since I've been doing this whole draft nick thing. That's one I've seen.
Yes, and the consensus of this draft about this position is I would have to say it is the deepest. I think it is the headline of this class, even though you have Manziel and Clowney, but I just think you can get wide receivers in fifth round to be your starters here. I mean, there's
Yeah.
there's a lot of wide receivers in this group, and as we say, this is like 32 flavors at Baskin Robbins. You can choose whatever you want. Big receivers, we got those. You want speed, we got those. You got slot, we got those. Just choose your flavor. That's what it is today, and so. In this podcast, we'll go over wide receivers, what their pro player comparisons are, what attributes they have, what's their what they bring to the playing field individually, what schemes they fit, what are they a slot, big man, whatever it is, and that's it. And so let's get it started. And the number one overall wide receiver in this rankings is Draft Day.
Sammy Watkins. I've been a fan of Sammy Watkins since he stepped onto to the field at Clemson. Day one, he was an amazing wide receiver. I remember his game against Auburn. Fell in love with him from then on out, and I said that this guy's going to be a number one wide receiver. Even in the preseason, after all of the little arrests that he went from the year before and the drop down in production after his sophomore year, preseason, I had him over Marquise Lee, who just finished coming off of a Lenikoff Award season and was having a spectacular season. Sammy Watkins has been that product and actually has an elite grade for me.
Right, and he's one out of three players, I believe, that have an elite grade in this draft.
Ultimately, I finished out my rankings. In my final rankings, I do have Sammy Watkins, one of three players that do have an elite grade.
Now, in this kind of wide receiver class, we don't have multiple like top tier talents, as in AJ Green and Julio Jones, but Sammy does hit the elite status. And what position do you believe he can play all the X, Y, and Z, and all the?
Yes, he could play. He could be in a slot. You could put him out at flanker. You could put him out off. You could even line him up occasionally, even a backfield if you're creative enough, and give him out maybe a sweep here or there. You can use him in a Percy Harvin's role. I preferably not. He could be your number one, your number two. He's just your overall complete wide receiver. He's big enough, he's strong enough, and he's fast enough. I actually do have him rated higher than Julio Jones. It's funny, like a lot of people would rate Julio Jones or AJ Green over him. He's about the same grade as I gave AJ Green.
Right, and AJ Green.
That's how highly I am of Sammy Watkins. I've been a huge fan of his game for a long time, and even after last year's production fell, I said he's going to rebound. A guy like this isn't going to have 2 bad years in a row. The offseason concerns about him last year ultimately was the downfall for Sammy Watkins because he got arrested, he got suspended, and then little injuries. He was late to training camp. Everything was on its way down, and then DeAndre Hopkins was having a really productive year, and he became the go-to wide receiver. I wasn't worried about that. That's probably the only time that Sammy Watkins I ever felt that he wasn't playing up to the level of his talent. But outside of that, Sammy Watkins, complete wide receiver.
Right, and now let's get into this. And what is his pro player comparison? Who is he?
I drew a comparison from a guy who was able to make an impact early in his career, consistent, everything. He's a little bit probably tougher than this player. I would probably give a comparison to Torrey Holt, the wide receiver out of the St. Louis Rams.
Right, and I believe, Sammy Watkins to me is a lot more tougher. And to me, the tape that kind of shows his toughness more than other games is his Georgia game, where
Mm-hmm.
there's one play where he catches the ball and he does lower.
It was his first catch of the season.
Yeah, and he lowers the shoulder and he isn't afraid to get take a hit or two, and I like that in wide receivers.
And they wouldn't be putting him in the backfield on sweeps, going in between the tackles sometimes if he wasn't a really tough, strong guy, because he can run like a running back, but he still has the route running abilities of a wide receiver. Is it finished? Is he a finished product? No. He still has little things that he probably could fix as far as route running and stuff like that. But at the same time, an explosive weapon like him, that's why I drew the comparisons to Torrey Holt, was because of his explosiveness and a similar traits to them, that they could take it to the distance and they could make people miss. That's the type of thing that Torrey Holt reminds me of, Sammy Watkins.
Right. And so now let's get to the number 2 ranking here, and who do you have here?
I have wide receiver Mike Evans out of Texas A&M. And ultimately, Mike Evans, I caught on to him a little bit later than most people as far as how good he was. I actually watched Mike Evans during the regular season, and I said, this is just another big wide receiver who just uses his size and all that type of stuff. You can get away with that stuff in college, because we've seen the big wide receivers, the Reggie Williams, the Mike Williams, even the Roy Williams. Those guys got away with their size, you know?
Yeah.
A lot of Williams. but those guys got away with their size and being able to just push off in the line of scrimmage and just out jumping everybody. In the NFL, you don't get away with that type of stuff. I wanted to see him be able to break in and out of his routes and do all of those type of things, and ultimately and be able to do those things and use your physicality and still be able to separate using your speed or your route running ability. He's not a complete route runner yet, but he's becoming a better route runner. And ultimately, the offense that he played in wasn't as much of a factor as I thought it would be, because he did run a few routes that are similar to NFL routes.
Right, and he is a big wide receiver, but like you said, he does have speed. A lot of people said that he didn't have any speed, and I think he does. Mm-hmm. And what is his NFL comparison to?
I drew a comparison to another big, fast wide receiver in former Northern Colorado, San Diego Chargers, and now Tampa Bay wide receiver Vincent Jackson.
Right, and I think I drew a lot of my biggest thing about Mike Evans was, I feel like he drew a lot of comparisons to me to Vincent Jackson, and the way he bullies corners reminded me of Brandon Marshall also. And
exactly, that's also another comparison we could really draw off as far as the similarities to him as well too, because he is similar to Brandon Marshall as far as yards after catch and breaking tackles, and he just has that consistent nastiness about him. He's a real competitor about it, about how he plays with the ball in his hands.
Right, and I like him a lot. I told everybody that if A&M was going to win against Alabama this year, it was going to go through him. He did have like a 270-yard game against them, I believe.
He also had a 200-yard game against Auburn as well, too.
Exactly, and this guy, to me, I've always said I feel like Mike Evans made Johnny Manziel, not Johnny Manziel made Mike Evans, because
I think they all both helped each other.
Right.
I don't think I'm not trying to knock down Johnny Manziel or anything like that. Mike Evans really helped him, but he would definitely benefited from having Johnny Manziel at the helm, because Johnny Manziel made things a little bit easier on him, because the simple fact is plays weren't – a normal wide receiver usually has 3 or 4 seconds to make a play, to run a route before the ball is already in his hands. He had a chance to run around, lose the coverage, and then catch the ball, because Johnny Manziel would often be running around and find a wide open Mike Evans running around. Getting open.
Right.
Similar like Russell Wilson, some of his wide receivers benefit from Russell Wilson, because if you have to cover a guy more than 5 seconds, it's really hard, especially that guy that's that big and that fast.
Right. And so I like Mike Evans a lot. I feel like there is some talks that Tampa Bay may get him, and the fact that Tampa Bay may get 2 pretty much of the same player on the team, that would be really nice for them, and Lovie Smith would be having Now we'll have Josh McCown will have two great wide receivers like he did.
It's two big wide receivers, just like how he had in Chicago.
And I always said there's two best friends to a rookie quarterback. That's a big wide receiver with a big wingspan and a tight end. That is a rookie rookie quarterback's favorite targets. And I think if they do draft a wide receiver, Drew drafted a quarterback later on, and they do get Mike Evans, I feel like that rookie quarterback will be very happy to have two huge dudes out there catch the ball for him. But now let's go to your third overall wide receiver, and who do you have ranked there?
I have Odell Beckham Jr., the wide receiver out of LSU. He's graded out very similar to a bunch of other guys, three other wide receivers that they graded around the same grade. He's more of your yards after catch, underneath wide receiver, could play the slot. He's a solid route runner. He has outstanding hands, great speed. He's just your true professional. But the thing about him is he struggles a little bit being a tougher type of guy. There's questions about Odell Beckham being the tougher wide receiver because anyone who's in a know of knows from LSU knows that Jarvis Landry was more of the competitor and the guy who's going to catch the ball over the middle. Odell Beckham wasn't that kind of a guy. His size probably doesn't ask for him to do that type of thing. And at times he also struggled blocking. I didn't always see a consistent effort. At times he'd block you really good, and then sometimes he'd just let corners run by him and make a tackle when he could have easily made a block or block on a safety or a linebacker. We're just looking for effort. We're not asking you to be Hines Ward. We're asking you to be a decent blocker. Sometimes you saw those flaws in him, but Odell Beckham overall, he's a top tier wide receiver.
Right, and I believe he's a good returner. As we saw, he's a good yards after the catch kind of guy, and
he has a good talent. He has a lot of talent.
Right, and so now who is his NFL comparison?
I drew a guy maybe a little bit earlier for some of our younger guys. Lavernius Coles from the New York Jets. I think Washington Redskins. What other teams?
Bengals, and then late Houston, Houston Texans. Yeah.
In the early 2000s, I don't remember the exact year, but I remember Lavernius Coles. Odell Beckham reminded me a little bit of Lavernius Coles as far as size-wise. He plays the same way, and they have a little bit of the same flaws because I always didn't think that Lavernius Coles always gave out all his all when he knows he's not getting the ball. He's not going to run his routes extra hard. Odell Beckham, same probably flaw because he doesn't always run the routes and do everything when he's not getting the ball into his hands.
Right, and now we go to your number 4 wide receiver ranking, and who's that?
It's almost a tie here as far as number 3, number 4, and number 5. Marquise Lee, the wide receiver out of USC.
Right, and he was a previous Biletnikoff Award winner. He had almost a 2,000-yard receiving season, but then he kind of fell down a little bit last year because of injuries, and then USC not being
quarterback play wasn't up to par as it was the previous years. USC was still trying to find out who's their starting quarterback, and he didn't look the same as the old Marquise Lee. Just never broke through the season that we were maybe hoping from him.
Right, and your evaluation on him?
His thing is he's not fast, but he plays fast. The 4.52 doesn't do him justice on tape because you watch the Fresno State game, you watch the Oregon game, he's smoking guys. Stanford in the past. Marquise Lee is a great yards after catch wide receiver who uses his route running, his quick breaks because he's quicker than fast, and his long stride to break down a defense as far as the yards after catch. He's similar to Odell Beckham, but they don't use they're not yards after catch guys in the same way because Marquise Lee is yards after catch because of his route running ability and his and how he strides because he's quicker than fast. Odell Beckham a little bit more just pure speed.
Right. He's just going to hit the outside and just go. Marquise Lee can bounce off people. He's a lot more elusive to me than some of the.
It's more elusive than that because it's like a guy's almost made out of rubber. He's really
Right. He's like Gumby.
hard to tackle for some odd rod. It really looks even like he's even faster than that.
Right. And I've always there's tapes, the Marquise Lee, the Fresno State tape, the Arizona tape of last year and of 2000,
where he just gets away from people who even at the combine ran faster time than him because of his long strides. He takes his strides really, really long. He knows how to run, and especially with the football in his hand, he's really good at that.
Right. And you have any NFL pro player comparison for him?
Marquise Lee, I drew Donald Driver, the wide receiver out of Green Bay Packers. He played at Alcorn State. I didn't get to evaluate him coming out, but as far as an NFL player, he really reminded me of him because they both do the same thing as far as how they separate. And Marquise Lee, he was a little bit always like a raw route runner to me, but the more and more I watched him and I compared him to the rest of the class, he's a little bit more advanced than any of my top tier wide receivers.
Right. Yeah, his to me, Marquise Lee, if you give him the ball, there's some wide receivers that may do that, but there's some like Sammy Watkins, Odell Beckham in some cases, but Marquise Lee, if you give him the ball, he could take it to the house almost at any given play to me. No matter if it's a slant, a screen, and
the thing I also think Marquise Lee also could be he's a little bit more versatile than Odell Beckham and even Mike Evans, because Mike Evans is your true flanker, number one wide receiver. You throw him out to the outside. Marquise Lee, you could line him up in the backfield. He could do some of the same stuff as Sammy Watkins could do as well too, but he also has a little bit more flaws than a lot of those guys too, and he's probably not as talented as Odell Beckham and Sammy Watkins and Mike Evans, just as far as natural talent. And there's also concerns about drops because he'll make an amazing catch here, and then the next play he'll just straight drop it. I mean, he has problems with drops, and that's definitely a concern because the ultimate, most important thing for a wide receiver to do is to catch the football. He had one too many drops for me to like.
Right, and now let's get into our fifth ranking that you also said is also tied up there with 3 and 4. And who is that? Who is your fifth rated?
Brandon Cooks. And the knock on him, the only reason I had him was slightly shorter is because of his size and what he's gonna be in the NFL. Because ultimately, he's not gonna be your flanker. He's probably not your number one wide receiver. But if you can get him in a slot, he'll be a walking mismatch. He could be 100-catch wide receiver because he is tough enough and he can take enough hits. And he had a rapport with his quarterback. And he broke through the shadows of Marcus Wheaton. And he was finally given the chance, and he showed out every game. You ask the guys in the West Coast who was the hardest wide receiver to guard game in and game out, Brandon Cooks was the guy. He put on a show last year, being the Blumenthal Award winner this year, with almost I think like 1,700 yards receiving. He showed everything that you possibly could do for his size. And if he was maybe 6'1", he might have been at the same conversation we're talking about, maybe Sammy Watkins.
Right, and he's listed at what 5?
5'8".
Right, so he's a little bit shorter. But he's still a big mismatch. He's probably
he is a big mismatch. I would love to see him maybe in a slot position. I don't like him maybe playing flanker because this biggest knock on him as on Tatum for me, what I watched him was when he was going up against the bigger physical corners. Like if you saw the Oregon game, it's the perfect example of Brandon Cook's strengths and weaknesses. When he faced Mitchell, the cornerback, the opposite cornerback at Oregon, she showed all those skills that I mentioned. And he was getting out of breaks and he would make all the big plays. But when they lined him up against Ifo Ekpreolu, he wasn't getting nothing. He was getting jammed on the line of scrimmage, and he looked like a very average wide receiver against Ifo. But when he faced the Mitchells and those type of guys, yeah, he was a little bit better. It's harder to press a guy if he's on the slot and he's not in the line of scrimmage. So he'd make a better slot wide receiver, but he'd probably be one of the best one in the league, though.
Right. And so, who is his big NFL comparison?
I drew a comparison to Santana Moss, more of a younger Santana Moss, when he had a little bit more explosiveness. Not Santana Moss now, where he's a little bit more of a possession receiver, better route runner, but he's not. He doesn't have the same explosiveness. Brandon Cooks reminded me a little bit of Santana Moss as far as size-wise and playing style.
Yeah, Santana Moss of the Jets, not of the Redskins.
Of the Redskins. A little bit the early Redskins, Santana Moss as well, too. Yeah, just not Santana Moss, RG3 Santana Moss.
Right. And so now let's get into your sixth ranking wide receiver and who you have there.
I had Allen Robinson, and I'm a big fan of Allen Robinson. He came in a little bit bigger than I thought he was, but he has great upside because his tape says that he's faster than what his 4.6 that he ran at the combine. I'm not sure what he ran on his pro day exactly because I don't have it listed in front of me. He's a great leaper. He's a solid yards after the catch guy. He knows how to sky things up. He has the size. He has the speed. He's just pretty much just your complete overall package that you want at wide receiver.
Right. To me, he does everything good. Everything he does about him is good, and there's not necessarily one thing that's great. But to me, I see he's a little bit. He has a lot of upside to me. And I think you can make him easily your number one wide receiver, an easily go-to guy. He helped out a young freshman out there in Happy Valley and Christian Hackenberg, and he has taken over some games out there also in Happy Valley. In the Michigan game,
he was the best wide receiver in the Big Ten, week in and week out.
Right, and I'm not agreeing with some of these draft experts have him as low as third round. I say this dude can push easily into the first round. And
I could see him going in the first round as well too. My rankings doesn't really reflect where I think he could go. He's probably maybe a middle of the second round type of guy, but I have him as a late first round, early second round type of player. The real thing about him is he is a sloppy route runner, and he doesn't always look the ball in as well too. A little stiff in the hips. Most of the things that Allen Robinson's not good at is fixable with a good coaching staff and time. Because I would have liked Allen Robinson to stay for one more year, especially in a class that's this deep of wide receivers. It would have benefited him night and day if he had maybe came back for another year.
Right, and so who is his NFL comparison? Who does he draw close comparisons to?
I drew Eric Moulds, the wide receiver out of Mississippi State, played for the Buffalo Bills for a long time and ended his career in Houston. He was a big play wide receiver. He could make yards after the catch. If you ever really needed him if you ever threw it up to him, he could definitely make those type of plays. And overall, he said that's the guy who I kind of drew the comparisons to.
Right, and so now that's your top 5 rank. Now we go into your 6. Who's your number 6?
Number 7.
No, number 7. My fault. Your number 7 ranking.
I have Devontae Adams with the same exact grade. It just tells you how deep that this class is. The thing that ultimately separated me between Devontae Adams and him was Devontae Adams didn't measure in the same way that I thought that he was. Even though he did play in that spread offense and stuff like that, and he had just a knack for touchdowns. I believe he had 22 touchdowns this year.
Yeah, he led
in the red zone. Nobody could guard Devontae Adams. Everybody had a struggle running against him against fades and stuff like that. He also could easily rapport with your quarterback, and he's your ideal West Coast type of wide receiver. In a West Coast offense, that's probably his best fit. There's some offenses that he does not fit, though.
As in, what offense do you believe he doesn't fit?
If you were to play in an offense where we're going to run a lot of vertical routes and we're a vertical offense, he's probably maybe not your type of offense. Because although he can go vertical, that's probably not his best suit because he has a harder time versus the quicker guys, the guys who can run with him down the field. he has a harder time against quicker corners more so than the bigger physical corners. He'll have the better days. It's odd for a big wide receiver to have better days against bigger corners. He actually played well against bigger corners. You can go and even though this game was a loss and his stats weren't the same, you can go and look at his best competition all year long, which was the USC game. He was being guarded by Josh Shaw. Josh Shaw was having a very hard time guarding him compared to what he had against Brendan Cooks.
Right, and Devonta Adams, to me, he's always been a red zone threat. I think he led the
country in touchdowns.
In touchdowns, yes, and he was big time. Every time he was in the red zone, touchdown. He was the dude, and even everybody on the defense knew he was getting the ball, and he still scored.
Mm-hmm.
And so
he was Derek Carr's go-to guy all year long.
Right. And so do you have an NFL comparison for him?
I drew the comparisons to Mushin Muhammad of the Carolina Panthers and Chicago Bears, I believe. He played for the Chicago Bears?
Yeah, he did before.
Yeah, he played for the Chicago Bears. He was on that Super Bowl team, yes. Mushin Muhammad from the Carolina Panthers and Chicago Bears, formerly of Michigan State. The thing that I really saw that's very similar between those two guys are they're not necessarily the tallest guys, but they're really good red zone threats, which they're not like 6'5" or anything like that. They're average wide receiver height, 6'1", 6'2", but they really can leap up there. They can beat you on fades and those type of routes, and they're tough guys to really play against in bumping run coverage. It's hard to get a press on those type of guys.
Right. And so now we go to your 8 ranking right here, and who do you have here?
This is Calvin Benjamin. I'm not as big a fan as Calvin Benjamin as everybody else because I really thought that playing with the quarterbacks he played made him a little bit better than what he did. He's not the most. He doesn't use his speed. He's also has lapses where he's not running his routes very well. He runs really sloppy routes. He drops passes. But the thing you can't ignore is he's a big, physical, strong wide receivers, and wide receivers of his caliber are rare.
Right, and he's a huge dude at 6'5", 200.
It's like having a tight end out at wide receiver.
Yeah.
Just walking mismatch. You're not going to find people who's going to be able to leap and jump and be able to cover him on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
He's 6'5", 250.
Yeah, and he's huge. He's a big dude. And the knock on him is I believe he's 24 years old as a redshirt sophomore. And
he's 23. I don't really know the history behind the whole why Calvin Benjamin didn't go, why he is 23 years old and he's only a redshirt sophomore. But it's not that big of a deal because normally this is the age where he would be a senior.
Right.
And maybe that's the thing that ultimately decided him. But he's still a little raw. I'd like to see him get better at that. And he's really only a possession wide receiver. He's not going to be your vertical threat. He's not going to fit your West Coast offense. He's not going to be yards after catch. He's not Marquise Lee or those type of guys. But at the same time, the thing that he really scares me, he has a lot of potential, but he really scares me because a lot of players I've seen of his style have been busts.
Mike Williams of the Lions and also of the Seahawks.
Rich Williams.
Yep.
It's a long list of big wide receivers that just use their physicality in college and their size.
And that's it. They don't have nothing else to them. And but yeah, I'm also not really that big of a fan of him. I mean, if there's a team that's gonna, groom him and, teach him and clean up his stiffness, then yeah, I believe so, but I just don't like him as much as these other guys with these other receivers bring to the table. And there's some players.
It's just because this class is so strong. I'd probably be raving about Calvin Benjamin if he was perhaps in another draft class. But it's because this class is so deep that I don't feel the same way as I want. And he's a little bit more of a drop off, but I would still probably take him in the middle of the second round because he has true number one wide receiver. he could be your big play wide receiver in the red zone, down the field, strong, big, just walking mismatch. That's a little hard to pass up, maybe in the second round.
Right. And so now let's go into after 8. Is there kind of a drop off for you, or are we still kind of cruising along the same, talent wise here?
We're still cruising along.
Yeah.
We're pretty much cruising along after 8 still.
And so let's kind of speed this up a bit. Let's go through 8. Let's see, you got 9 through 12. I believe that's kind of similarities there.
Yeah, that's when we have the prospects who are I'd probably say second rounders or first rounders.
Yeah, and so let's get to it. Who do you have 9 through 12?
I had Jordan Matthews, who I love his route running and his preparation. He's just a constant professional.
And the best thing I gotta say before I interrupt you is Jordan Matthews is I believe his uncle is Jerry Rice. I believe.
Yeah. It's no surprise he acts like a professional wide receiver. Even at the guys who were telling me about the Senior Bowl, he would go out and he was asking for films from all the coaches and everybody that he possibly could. And he was even on YouTube looking at different cornerbacks. He's always preparing. He doesn't like to be unprepared. His ultimate thing is his ultimate nightmare is it's not to fail. It's to be unprepared.
Right, just like his kind of like his uncle was when his uncle was coming out, and also when he was at the 49ers. But yeah. And keep going. You have at 10 through 12.
I'm a fan of Paul Richardson. He's a one-trick pony right now, but we said the same thing about Torrey Smith when he was coming out of Maryland. He was a one-trick pony, and he eventually developed. Paul Richardson, same thing. He uses his speed, his vertical ability, but at the same time, you develop him, he could be your Mike Wallace, he could be your Torrey Smith. I like him as well too. A guy who I probably should have had a little bit higher, but ultimately his measurables didn't measure up to what I really liked. I wanted out of him was Jarvis Landry. I mean, this is your tough, physical Anquan Bolden kind of guy. He might not have Anquan Bolden's size, but at the same time, he's not as fast. He's not very big, but he just catches balls down the middle. Tough guy. He's ultimately the opposite of Odell Beckham in a way. He's more of the I'll get the yards over the middle. I'll do all the dirty work. I'll run my routes hard, even though I know I'm not getting the ball.
Right, and you can tell he even carries himself that way. On NFL Network, there was a show called Game Changers there, and Steve Mariucci says, what do you want, where do you want to catch the ball? Most of them said, touchdown, a red zone, or outside, I'm going to hit the outside. Jarvis Landry was the only one on there that says, I want to catch it in the middle. And he goes like, what Mike Irvin says, you're going to get smacked. He's like, nah, I'm not going to get hit. I'm going to get some hits and on people too. And to me, Jarvis Landry just speaks toughness. And you see it in his catches. I mean, he's had top 10 plays like nothing. He makes top 10 plays like it's easy. Like he's just
He has really good hands, big hands as well too. Yeah,
he's probably the best hands in this draft class, probably. And he's made some.
It'd be a fair comparison between him and Jared Abadaris from Wisconsin.
And so I'm a big fan of Jarvis Landry a lot because of his toughness, and he carries himself very well. And so now, who's your number 12 ranking?
I have Dante Moncrief out of Ole Miss, which it was a surprise, but it wasn't a surprise because he was always letting people know that he really wanted to test the NFL waters. It wasn't that big of a surprise, but I was surprised in the sense that I thought that this is a really I started seeing the wide receivers starting to come out, and Dante Moncrief came out and kind of disappointed me because I really thought that he could have used another year and he would have benefited from having another year of college, and he would have probably been in a little bit more of a thin wide receiver class. Dante Moncrief, probably a first rounder next year, but this year he's a second rounder. And if you could get a first rounder in 2015, in 2014, it's a benefit.
Oh yeah, big time. Round. And now there's the drop off here, and now I'm gonna do something interesting for you guys here. We're gonna have to cut this podcast about here, but the next time we get on our podcast, we're actually gonna break down more of these wide receiver class, and we're gonna get into sleepers. A lot of sleepers here, a lot of receivers you can pick and choose from. It may be a little bit of a quick podcast, but this podcast is really deep, it's really long, and the only and do you have any wide receivers you want to mention that you want to kind of get out there, like give a sneak preview for our next podcast?
Cody Latimer from Indiana, who I kind of underrated. I caught on to him very, very late into the prospect, but this is a guy I really want to kind of talk about as well.
Right, and my sleeper for here is I feel like he should have stayed in school. He would have benefited so much more. He probably would have been, from a thin receiver, kind of like Dante Moncrief, but maybe not as talented. Maybe he wouldn't have gotten the first round status. But it's Montavious Bryant from Clemson.
Yeah, he would have benefited from.
I just, because he was behind Nuke Hopkins, then then Sammy, and then now he comes out with Sammy, and this guy.
And like you had your chance in that wide open offense to display all your talents next year and be the go-to guy. And the go-to guy in Clemson always gets big yards. Whether it be Dwayne Allen, he was the go-to guy. He got big yards. And then it was Nuke Hopkins and now Sammy Watkins. They all get big-time production.
And
for another year, you get that production.
And he's measured in, I believe, at 6'4", and then he's ran a 4.37, and so he does have some speed to his game. And I'm kind of a fan of his, but I just still think, man, if he would have just stayed, he would have probably hit, really good yardage last year in Clemson, especially. But
yeah, he would have been the go-to guy. I was hoping for him to come back, and I was hoping to evaluate him in 2015. But hey, I can't tell him. Maybe he had financial problems. Maybe
we don't. Yeah, exactly. We don't know these.
Don't know that type of thing, but. Just football-wise, I wasn't happy with the decision from Martavius Bryant.
Right, and Cody Latimer.
Even Dante Moncrief.
Yeah, but even Cody Latimer, I'm also, there's a lot of people starting to get on the rise of him and stuff like that. But until next time, we'll talk more about this wide receiver class.
Mm-hmm.